I stopped funding Christmas and my family's masks came off at 7 o'clock. I paid for 41 Christmases in a row, and on the 42nd I didn't send a single dollar. And by 7 o'clock that night, I watched my own family turn into people I didn't recognize. My name is Lauren, I'm 73 years old, and what happened in my dining room that evening is the reason I'm sitting here telling you this story instead of keeping it to myself the way I've kept everything else to myself for the last 5 decades. Before I get into it, if you're the kind of person who believes older women don't have teeth left to bite with, stick around because you're about to learn different. Hit that like button if you've ever been the family bank and nobody bothered to say thank you. Subscribe if you want to hear how this story ends, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let me tell you what happened. For most of my adult life, I was the one who made Christmas happen. Not just the cooking, though I did that too, standing over a stove at 5 in the morning so the turkey would be ready by noon. I mean the money. The plane tickets for my son and his family to fly in from 3 states away. The extra bedroom furniture I bought so my grandchildren would have somewhere comfortable to sleep when they visited. The envelope with cash that I slipped to each of them every single year. An envelope that got fatter as the years went on and their expectations grew right along with it. Started small, the way these things always do. When my husband passed 11 years ago, I inherited the house free and clear, a modest pension, and enough savings that I could live comfortably if I was careful. My son, I'll call him Bradley because that's not his real name but it'll do for this story, had just had his second child, and money was tight for him and his wife Kimberly. So that first Christmas without my husband, I paid for everything. Told myself it was what my husband would have wanted, that family takes care of family, that I had more than I needed and they had less than they wanted. The thing about generosity, though, is that if you're not careful, people stop seeing it as a gift. They start seeing it as a paycheck. And paychecks, once they're expected, become obligations. And obligations, once they're missed, become betrayals in the eyes of the people who were counting on them. By year 3, Bradley wasn't calling to ask how I was doing. He was calling to ask what my Christmas budget looked like this year so he could plan his own spending around it. By year 5, Kimberly had stopped even pretending to help in the kitchen when they visited, because in her mind, I think, my money had already paid for her time. By year 8, my granddaughter, who I love more than my own life, had learned to ask for things not from her parents but from me, because she'd figured out at 10 years old that grandma was where the yeses lived. I told myself this was just how families worked. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself a lot of things over those years that, looking back now, were lies I needed to survive believing. The turning point came about 8 months before that Christmas I'm telling you about. I'd gone in for a routine checkup and my doctor mentioned almost in passing that at my age I should really be thinking about my long-term care, about what happens if I need assisted living someday, about making sure my finances could support me for another 20 or 30 years if I was lucky enough to have them. It was a wake-up call I hadn't asked for and desperately needed. I went home that day and pulled out every bank statement I had from the past decade, and what I found made my stomach drop. I had given away, in gifts and Christmas funding and loans that were never repaid, well over $90,000. Money that should have been sitting in my retirement account growing, protecting me, was instead sitting in my son's garage in the form of a boat he'd bought 2 Christmases ago after I'd covered his mortgage payment just this once the month before. I didn't say anything right away. I'm not an impulsive woman, never have been. I spent the next several months quietly getting my affairs in order in a way nobody in my family knew about. I met with an elder law attorney, a sharp woman about my daughter's age who didn't flinch when I told her the whole situation. Together we set up an irrevocable trust for my house, my savings, everything I had left, structured in a way that protected it from being pressured out of me and also protected it from creditors, from manipulation, from anyone who might someday think that because I was getting older, I was getting easier to push around. I also did something I'd never done before in my life. I started keeping records. Text messages where Bradley asked for money. Emails where Kimberly hinted, not so subtly, that it would be a shame if the grandchildren didn't get a real Christmas this year because things were tight. I wasn't building a legal case, not exactly. I was building a mirror so that when the time came I could hold it up and show them exactly what they'd become. If you're new to this channel, this is usually the point in the story where things start to unravel for everybody except me. So if you haven't yet, now's a good time to subscribe, because I promise you the next part is worth sticking around for, and I'd love to know where you're tuning in from as this unfolds. So that November I made a decision. I would not be funding Christmas that year. Not the plane tickets. Not the gifts. Not the extra groceries. Nothing. I would host because I still wanted to see my grandchildren, but everyone would bring what they could afford, the way families are supposed to do when nobody's keeping score with someone else's checkbook. I didn't announce it with fanfare. I simply sent a group text in early November, warm and simple, saying that this year I'd love for everyone to come for a potluck-style Christmas, that I was scaling back on gifts to focus on just being together, and that I couldn't cover travel this time around due to some financial planning I was doing for my own future. I meant every word of it kindly. I expected, at worst, some grumbling. What I got instead was silence. 3 days of it. Then Bradley called, and his voice had an edge to it I'd never heard directed at me before. He wanted to know what financial planning meant, whether I was in some kind of trouble, whether I'd been talking to a lawyer, and underneath every question was something that sounded less like concern and more like suspicion, like he was worried the money train had a mechanical problem rather than a conductor who'd simply decided to stop the ride. Kimberly got on the phone next, and she wasn't nearly as careful with her words. She said, and I remember this almost word for word, that it was kind of selfish of me to change things up at the last minute when they'd already told the kids about the trip. She said the children would be devastated. She said families that really loved each other didn't make things difficult during the holidays. I stayed calm. I've had 73 years of practice staying calm while people who claim to love me try to make me feel guilty for having boundaries, and I've gotten quite good at it. I told her I understood their disappointment, but that my decision was final, and that I hoped they'd still come, because I missed my grandchildren and wanted to see them regardless of what was or wasn't under the tree. They came. Grudgingly, and mostly because Bradley didn't want to be the one who kept the kids from seeing their grandmother, but they came. And that's when the real Christmas happened, the one I want to tell you about, the one where the masks finally came off. They arrived around 4 in the afternoon on Christmas Day, and I could feel the difference the moment they walked through my door. No warmth in the hugs. No real eye contact from Kimberly, who busied herself unpacking a store-bought dessert like she was doing me a favor by contributing at all. My granddaughter, bless her heart, was the only one who seemed like herself, running up to hug me the way she always had, oblivious to the tension the adults were carrying into my home like unwelcome guests. Dinner itself was tense but survivable. I'd made a smaller meal than usual, nothing extravagant, but good, honest food made with care the way I'd always made it. We got through the meal with polite, clipped conversation. It was after dinner, around 7 o'clock, when everyone had settled into the living room and my grandson asked, innocently, where the presents were, that everything I'd been building toward finally arrived. I explained gently that this year we were doing things differently, that instead of a big pile of gifts, I'd planned a few small meaningful things and wanted us to spend the evening together instead. My grandson took it in stride, the way children often do when adults don't make a big deal out of things. It was the adults in the room who couldn't let it go. Bradley was the one who broke first. He said, in front of his own children, that this whole new leaf I'd apparently turned over felt like a punishment, that I was clearly angry about something and taking it out on the family instead of just saying what was actually bothering me. And there it was, the opening I'd known would come eventually, the moment where I could either keep swallowing my feelings the way I had for years, or finally say the truth out loud in my own house, at my own table, surrounded by the family I'd spent my life sacrificing for. So I said it. I told them I'd spent the last several months reviewing exactly how much money had passed from my hands into theirs over the past decade. And I told them the number out loud in that quiet living room, and watched Kimberly's face go pale. I told them that I loved them and that love was never the question, but that somewhere along the way my generosity had stopped being received as a gift and had started being treated as a right, and that I was done funding an idea of Christmas that had nothing to do with actually being together and everything to do with what I could provide. That's when Kimberly's mask really came off. She stood up, and I want to tell you her exact words because I think about them often. She said that I clearly didn't understand what it took to raise a family these days and that some grandmothers actually want to help. She said it like I was some kind of miser hoarding gold in a cave, instead of a woman who had quietly given away nearly $100,000 over the years without ever once asking for a thank you card. Bradley, instead of defending me, sat there and let her say it. That hurt more than anything Kimberly said herself. My own son, sitting in the house I paid off with money he never knew I'd sacrificed to save, letting his wife accuse me of stinginess while my grandchildren sat wide-eyed on the couch watching their parents unravel in real time. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to understand that, because I think there's something in this story for anyone who's ever been afraid that standing up for yourself means becoming someone you're not. I simply told them calmly that I had already met with an attorney, that my home and my savings were now protected in a trust that couldn't be pressured or guilt-tripped out of me, and that going forward, my financial support of anyone in this family would come from genuine generosity, freely given, and not from obligation or fear of disappointing people who had shown me, in that very moment, exactly what they valued about our relationship. The room went silent. Kimberly sat back down. Bradley wouldn't meet my eyes. And my granddaughter, in the way that only children can cut straight through the noise adults create, asked if we could still watch the Christmas movie we always watched, because she didn't care about presents, she just wanted to be with Grandma. We watched the movie. It was honestly one of the more peaceful hours of that entire evening. Sitting there with my grandchildren while their parents stewed in the discomfort of having been seen clearly for the first time in years. They left early that night, polite but cold, and I haven't heard from Bradley since except for one short, stiff message a few weeks later asking if I was doing okay. Not asking about money, not asking to visit, just checking, I think, whether the well was really and truly closed. I told him I was doing better than okay, that I was doing the best I'd felt in years, and I meant it. I want to tell you what happened after that because I think it's the most important part of this whole story. I didn't spend that winter in regret. I spent it planning a trip to visit my sister, something I hadn't done in 6 years because there was never enough money left over after everyone else's needs were met. I redid my kitchen, the one I'd been putting off for a decade because Bradley's mortgage always came first. I started this very channel actually in January because I realized I had a lot to say and a lot of years of silence to make up for. My granddaughter still calls me on her own phone, without her parents knowing half the time. We talk about her school, her friends, nothing about money at all. And those conversations feel more like love than any envelope of cash I ever handed anyone. I like to think that someday when she's older, she'll understand exactly why her grandmother stopped writing checks and started writing her own story instead. If there's one thing I want you to take away from all of this, it's that love and money are not the same currency, no matter how many people in your life try to convince you they are. Real family doesn't disappear when the funding stops. And if yours does, then what you lost that Christmas wasn't a family tradition. It was a transaction dressed up in wrapping paper, and you're better off without it. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the one everyone counted on and nobody counted for, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you've ever had to draw a line with the people who are supposed to love you the most. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this one because I have plenty, and I'm finally at the age where I've decided to stop keeping them to myself. I'll see you in the next one.